Hey guys, Quantum here, and in this video we're going to be doing our weekly market watch. We're going to focus on Into the Inklands again because over this past weekend, March 16th and 17th, there were a couple of big tournaments that caused some pretty big paradigm shifts in the meta. You've probably already seen it. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to play too much since work has been very busy, and I do apologize for the market watch video that I posted on the Monday because I didn't realize that the audio was out of sync. But we're going to get straight into it here. But before we do, I just wanted to kind of go back and take a look at what the impact was. The big tournaments at the time that influenced the market over the weekend was the 186 player online Pixelborn tournament and the 8K that had 226 players in the US. So if we take a look at this real quick, you can see that a lot of the Ruby Amethyst decks ended up not winning their top 8 matches. So 4 of them all in top 8, and the top 4 was 3 steel variants, 2 amber and 1 amethyst, and then only 1 Ruby Amethyst. So again, just playing the odds, 5 Ruby Amethyst in the in-person top 8. And then we take a look at the pack tournament, and this, in my meta report, like it reported the numbers differently, like in terms of top 8s. I think there were like 3 Sapphire Steel and 2 Ruby Sapphire. So it looks like during the actual top 8, they corrected the deck list. So it's only 2 Sapphire Steel and 1 Ruby Sapphire. And the big thing with these decks is the inclusion of lucky dimes everywhere, right? You're probably checking out the thumbnail and seeing that, and we're going to cover the impact of this card in the Sapphire decks now. So I'll do another like meta report a little bit later, but let's go ahead and jump straight into the meta. So if you were paying attention on my channel, I made a post, I think it was the Friday. It's probably still up in my community post where I said, hey, did you guys pick up your lucky dimes yet? Because I knew this card was going to spike. And you can see here that I ended up picking mine up for $4.42 each. I only needed 2. And yeah, I mean, this was on the Friday. And then you can see just over the weekend what ended up happening with this card after. The Monday when I was making my original market watch video, this card was sold out and people were buying them for 14-15 bucks. It looks like that's kind of what they're going for non-foil. Wild to see the foil ones going for over 20 USD. It feels bad to pay that price for them though. In my opinion, the card is probably worth $10, but hey, that's what the market dictates, right? But yeah, you can see the spike over this weekend basically is because it's being included in every Sapphire list. So we'll quickly cover why this is important, then we'll move on. So in Sapphire, right, whether you're playing Sapphire Ruby or Sapphire Steel, I could be wrong, but I think that this card right now has more utility in the Steel deck, but I know a lot of people are hyped up on the Ruby version. The reason I like it in the Steel variant is because the Steel variant can go back to playing Bell, and even if Bell gets Medusa and Maleficent, Be Prepared, etc., Bell only costs 4, and on 10 plus ink, it has 5 lore. So Lucky Dime, right? You play Bell for 4, you Lucky Dime for 2 if the Lucky Dime was already established prior to when you were ramping up to 10 ink. You get 5 lore instantly with Bell. If your opponent doesn't out the Bell, you win the game basically, right? Because Bell will quest for 5, then you'll Lucky Dime again for 5. So the Bell demands an immediate answer with the Lucky Dime. Like that interaction is so strong. I don't think the top decks were playing Bell, so it might be a little bit of a gimmick because Lucky Dime should just be strong enough on its own with like getting 3 lore off of a Gaston, getting 2 lore off a Cogsworth or a Tinkerbell or a Beast Tragic Hero, etc. Because when you think about this card, you can compare it to like Spellbook. Spellbook costs 3, it's also uninkable. You pay 1, you gain 1 lore. This card has a higher ceiling, right? You pay 2, but you can gain 3, 4, 5, even 6, 7, or 8 lore if you play it with like a Tamatoa with a bunch of items, right? But again, that's getting kind of gimmicky. In practical application, though, the non-questing sources of lore, like we've talked about many times before, is proving to be very relevant because we know Ruby Amethyst, one of the strongest decks in the format, has no way to answer items. So this card makes the Ruby Sapphire matchup much better against Ruby Amethyst, but also in Sapphire Steel, it's just a faster way for you to close out the game with like more assurance. Moving on, we got the Robin Hood. This card is kind of stabilized a little bit, it looks like, after dropping off of its high. We've seen less representation from Emerald Steel, even though the deck is still very popular. And I think we've also seen a little bit of a decline of the Steel Amethyst deck. I do think that the Steel Amethyst deck is still decent. It does have some troubled matchups, but this card is played in that deck as well. But the only real like top contending deck that this card really is seeing play in now is the Amber Steel Song deck, and that deck is still very, very strong. We see it constantly topping. It obviously won the big 8K, and the Sapphire Steel could play this card, but it really doesn't, because again, on 3 you don't want to shift this. You likely want to establish Fishbone Quill, or the Mickey to ramp, right? That's why they play like 3 Mickey, 4 Fishbone Quill usually, because they just want to see that on turn 3. Card is still very good. It's still a great anti-aggro option. In person, I think it feels great as well. Like, there is a difference between online and in-person play. I'm sure you guys have realized it. But this card is like a tempo card, right? It keeps up with the lore by banishing. It maintains board control. It's hard to out. It's a singer. It still does all of these things very well. And for that reason, I think the price is still fairly warranted. Again, this is not financial advice, but I would be looking to pick these up around 30 bucks if I didn't have a playset and I wanted to play Steel and I wanted to play this card. Over 30, it's not necessarily a bad deal because the card is very important. But when you're looking at Steel, the issue is you're looking at Beast Tragic Heroes, you're looking at Tinkerbells, you're looking at Whole New Worlds probably, and it just gets very, very expensive very quickly if you didn't already have those cards early on. Looking at Ursula Deceiver, as we've talked about, the less representation in the top cuts of tournaments now with Emerald Steel not really being too represented. The only real deck that's playing the Ursula now that is having some success is the Amethyst Emerald deck, the tempo-based deck, and the only thing that really gets sung with Ursula in that deck is Mother Knows Best and Friends on the other side, so draw 4 or bounce 2. So this card has come down quite a bit, and it looks like it is stabilizing a little bit under $30 USD. Again, a very good card that just gets better over time. So in my opinion, you guys know if you watch my videos, I paid 37 Canadian for them. They're around, I think, 37 or 40 bucks, I guess. 30 times 1.3, I think that's around 40. My math might be terrible, I don't know. But, is it a bad deal at this price? I don't think so. I think if you want to play Emerald, you absolutely need this card. I shouldn't say need, but it obviously improves your deck compared to without it. And any other ink pairing that you pair with Emerald, like they all have like decent songs, like some kind of decent, maybe not Ruby, but like the rest of them have decent songs that you can sing with this card and get double value off of, right? So keep that in mind. Keep an eye on this card. If you see a card that's at a decent price and it's you like the card and you want it, and you're like, look, it's off of its high, it looks to have stabilized here, I think this is a good price. I don't think it goes down from here. If you think that, it's a good time to buy. If you think it's going to go down further, don't buy it. If you think it's has good application in the future, you pick them up. That's kind of how the approach to buying cards usually will work if you want to have decent success. Jafar continues to drop. I called this in my previous Market Watch video where I said this card likely goes to 2025 Canadian. I think that the hype off of the Jafar with the Steel Amethyst deck, which is really the only place it's used, has kind of died off. Zephyr did do an 8-0 run first after Swiss in the first big Pixelmore tournament with this card. But honestly, I think the non-Jafar versions of Steel Amethyst, like the more aggro-heavy variants, are probably better. They're just more consistent, right? Whereas you're trying to get this combo off. Yes, it is very powerful if you do get it off, but we've seen that people are playing other decks that, you have to deal with their board, so you can't really set up your own combo, or they have outs to your like Shift Jafar. If you're playing the Steel Jafar, they know you're going for this Jafar if you're on Amethyst. So it's very telegraphed, right? And people are just naturally learn how to play against those things, and it just becomes unfortunately worse over time. But who knows, right? If you didn't have a playset before and you're looking for them, maybe now is the time. Maybe they drop a little bit further. But definitely keep an eye on this card if you did want to pick them up, because there's more draw in Amethyst that you can draw after this card is exerted. This card just becomes better, right? So we'll wait and see what happens. Jim Hawkins also at an all-time low. This card obviously shifted out of the Ruby Amethyst deck, which is where it was really being hyped up to be played in. And the reason for that is because, again, the meta has evolved. I didn't really talk about it in the beginning, but we are seeing rapid developments in the meta. And the reason for that is because, obviously, people are testing very aggressively in preparation for the set championships. And as a result, the meta, some things meta one week and not meta the next, right? So when everybody was on Ruby Amethyst and playing Jim Hawkins, we were seeing a lot of Maui interactions, and people were like, Jim Hawkins just isn't it, because I lose the card advantage, I lose the tempo when they drop the Maui with the fish hook, they out my location for free. I just played a 5 cost 4/4 vanilla that quest for 2, feels bad. But as you see these other decks emerge out of the meta, this card might have more application in the future. Then maybe it shifts back into rotation. Personally, for me, I would like to have not necessarily a playset. I think maybe 2 would be good if you're playing Ruby Amethyst, because you might shift this in and out of your deck depending on what you're seeing in both your local meta and online in terms of testing. Locations are still strong, don't get me wrong, right? And they can be very hard to out, especially with the Ruby pairing. Post Be Prepared, you just have a location on board. If your opponent isn't on like the Maui, if they don't have the Maui in hand, if they're on Ruby, it can be hard to out locations, and you're gaining X amount of lore with them every turn, and you can set up like with the Queen's Castle. So they are still relevant, and for that reason, I think Jim Hawkins around 20 Canadian is personally a good value. Again, it's not financial advice, but I wouldn't mind picking them up for 20 bucks. I know for some people that is expensive, $80 for a playset, but I don't think it's necessarily the worst. Moving on to the next card, we're going to cover some of the off meta things. Anything that's not really in the meta right now, like that's not topping tournaments, is just absolutely tanking. So if you haven't picked up interesting cards that you want playsets of, now is the time to really keep an eye on them. Kita under $10. This card is very strong. While we know Robin Hood, for example, is a very good anti-aggro tech, Kita is actually a direct answer to that, because the Kita would give -3 to the Robin Hood, meaning that it can't banish anything, it can't take out anything. And what's nice is usually with the aggro decks you play Amethyst Amber. With the Amethyst cards like the Mim Snake, etc., you can bounce the Kitas back to hand, recast them, keep your opponent's board on -3. All of your mini questers can quest for a lot, right? And you can close out a game that way. So a nice little cheeky combo you can pull off with Kitas. Again, I got a playset around $10 a copy, and that was when they were going for like 15-ish Canadian, so I got a decent deal. But I knew these were going to drop, right? Because these aren't going to be well represented in the meta because of how much steel was dominating, right? And all it takes is, a shift 5, and then, even though Robin Hood gets -3, he can still single grab your swords and wipe out your aggro threats. So keep that in mind. But Kita is an interesting card. Might be worth taking a look at if you're interested in picking this up and playing a fun deck or something, or, could be competitive with aggro. Grammatal has proven to not be it for Sapphire, as we've just discussed. It seems like the Lucky Dime has kind of taken over, and rightfully so. With this card, it seems a little clunky. You have to pay 7 to play it, and then, or 5 for shift if you're playing the smaller Grammas. And then you ink maybe once or twice with Fishbone. You're not really singing songs. The deck becomes very clunky. So these combo heavy cards don't seem to be very good, whereas you're seeing the rise, so to speak, of these more generically good cards that air quotes combo with anything. Like Lucky Dime works with anything. You can Lucky Dime 2 for a Hiram and gain 1 lore. You can Lucky Dime on a Tinkerbell for 2. You can Lucky Dime on a Gaston for 3. Whereas Grandma, yes, you're inking every turn potentially, right? Maybe not, but depending on how your hand size is, this card can be good or not good, right? Because you need to see other ways to generate ink with it, and if you just don't have that, this card just isn't it. So this card at an all-time low and kind of stabilizing at the like $5-6 mark, it looks like. Hydra also kind of flatlined at an all-time low, under $2 for a legendary. This is not or around $2, I should say, USD for a legendary. Not bad. This card has one application that I know of right now in the Amber Ruby Mufasa deck. Getting this off of Mufasa isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's a 6 strength body that basically outs more or less anything, because once you damage something, you're applying how much damage that you took on your Hydra also back onto that character potentially to take it out. So like a Tamatoa, well, this would die to a Tamatoa because Tamatoa was a 5/8, but this thing would deal like 11 damage to Tamatoa, right? So it basically outs anything it challenges. It's very strong. It quests for 2, and when your opponent tries to out it with a character in a challenge, you're just going to be able to deal 5 or however many ever damage. Like if a Maui swings into it, you're going to deal 5 damage to something else as well on the board potentially. So it's a decent card. I don't know, again, a legendary around $2. I'm not hesitating to pick up a playset if I don't have one already. And I think if you watch my picture there, I think I did pick up one. Yeah, at $350. Like, you're not gonna get better than that, right? Like, well, I mean, you can, but it's a decent price in my opinion. The Queen's Castle continues to be the most expensive rare into the Inklands. It has come down a bit, but it looks to have stabilized under $5 USD now. I think this card is decent to have. I have a play set of non-foils and 3 foils myself. Still need 1 more foil. But I do like to have multiple copies of the Amethyst cards, because Amethyst pairs so well with a lot of colors in my opinion, like Ruby Amethyst, Amethyst Steel, Emerald Amethyst, etc., and Amber Amethyst Aggro. Not that you'd play this in that, but anyways, I'm kind of ranting here. But the card is still very good, right? It may be played, it may not be played in certain builds, but the good thing is like it's inkable, right? So if it's in a matchup where you can use it, it's very strong. If it's in like a Ruby Amethyst match where they have Mauis and Mim Foxes with crabs, etc., you're just like, I'll just ink it, that's fine, right? Maybe you're in a position where you can play it, if you're in Ruby Amethyst and post be prepared and you're like, okay, the opponent's on like 2 cards, I'm on 2 cards, but I have a Queen's Castle, I set this up, they probably don't have Maui. I get 2 lore and I can maybe set some stuff up on it and draw some cards. My opponent can't answer it for like a turn or 2. The extra draw is usually enough to win you the game, because that card advantage is absolutely insane. So again, I think it's worth picking this up if you don't have them. Again, is this price a good price to pick it up at? That's up to you to determine. This card might end up dropping over time, especially, and it probably doesn't get power crept, but it's hard to say. Like, I think it's good in certain applications, and in this meta right now, I'd rather have this card than not, I guess, right? I'd rather have the powerful cards that I can slot into my deck based on how the meta changes, rather than not have them. And if I see a card stabilizing at a certain price, to me that indicates that the card probably isn't going to tank too much further. It's impossible to time the absolute lows and the absolute highs, but you know, if I see good value in a card, I'm picking it up. I'm not too worried about the price, you know, assuming it's not like hundreds of dollars, that is. Moving on to the next one here, I just want to cover just some random stuff. Boss is on a roll at like 10 cents. Just a kind of cheeky card. You know, we know that Emerald Amethyst only plays like 2 songs. It's nice to maybe throw in like 1 or 2 copies of something else that you kind of get some utility off of. Again, maybe not the most competitive, but one thing I do like about this is you gain lore. So if you sing this with the Ursula, the 3 cost Emerald one, you gain 2 lore off of this card. You arrange your cards however you want, which is not necessarily a bad thing. And with all the card draw that you have in that deck, like you play a Merlin Rabbit, you know what you're going to draw. You're setting up your plays to end the game most likely. You know, not a bad card to pick up at like 10 cents, right? I don't think it gets much lower than that. The Rafiki continues to climb. For those of you that don't know, again, this was covered very early on in the meta. This is the card that Amethyst needed in order to help stave off a lot of early game pressure, and it definitely does that. It's a very good card, and if you don't have your playset, I mean, I wouldn't pay $5 for it. Oh, this is a cool foil one. Yeah, I picked up my foil ones for $1.50 each, and I picked up my non-foil ones for like, I think I pulled 2, and I bought 2 for 50 cents each. You know, and that was, again, way early on. But, you know, if you were playing or you were watching anybody, like any competitive players or myself, my own videos, etc., you know that this card was being played in every single Amethyst list. Amethyst Emerald, Ruby Amethyst. Amethyst Steel, like, I guess, didn't need to play because they have Hook. But, you know, this card is still very good. It represents, you know, a really good value card, because I've talked about this before, where, like, Hook, even in the mid-game, with the 3 strength that it gets off of the challenge, like, well, you know, it's a challenger too, but it gets up to 3 strength, just like Rafiki does. They have application in the late game, right? Like, they can take out Mim Snakes, Mim Foxes, Goats, Rabbits, a lot of other things, like in the meta too, that are X and 3, right? We know 3 is a big hurdle now to overcome. It takes out like Aerials and stuff like that as well. So, you know, if you don't have your playset and you're playing Amethyst, I mean, you need this card. Unfortunately, you'll be buying it at the high right now. Well, I guess, you know, if you pre-ordered it, nobody should pre-order. But yeah, wow, people are paying $3 a copy. That's insane. Yeah, wow. I personally would not. I would wait. You can probably find them locally for cheaper. I wouldn't buy them from a shop if they're charging that much personally. But who knows? This card just might continue to go up because, again, it is meta, and there's a lot of Amethyst decks in the meta right now. Cursed Merfolk, again, personally for me, just my own opinion, under $2, I'm picking up copies of this card. For Emerald, this is the 1-drop, right? If you compare this to like Maleficent Biding Her Time, which is, you know, the color pairing that Emerald is having the most success with right now in Amethyst, you play this over the Maleficent, right? Because the 1 strength on Maleficent is kind of irrelevant. This thing still quests for 2, just like Maleficent does. It's still a 1 cost on Inkable. The difference is this card will always trade 1 for 1. Even if your opponent, like Teeth and Ambitions it, you've still traded 1 for 1. You may not get the 2 lore out of it, but, you know, the same thing happens with the Maleficent 1-drop. If the Maleficent 1-drop quest and your opponent outs it with a character and they still have their character on board and you lose your Maleficent Biding Her Time, you've just went -1 for 2 lore, which I guess is okay, but this card is just better, because if you quest with this, you gain your 2 lore and your opponent challenges it, they're forced to discard. So at least it trades 1 for 1, but it also gets you the 2 lore, right? So hopefully you can understand that concept, but this is why this card is good. Does it get power crept next set? I don't know, but in the Inklands meta right now, if you're playing Emerald, I think this card is a very powerful 1-drop to be playing. So yeah, under $2. Again, for me personally, a card that's like $2, I don't mind picking up a playset for like, you know, $8. That's like the price of a Starbucks latte, right? So forego your coffee one day, you hipsters, and pick up the important cards that you need, maybe. Or like, you know, like a meal, I don't know, like a McDonald's meal. Hopefully you guys aren't eating too many McDonald's, but if you are, you know, make something healthy at home and invest that $8 into a playset of good cards, maybe, instead of junk food. Anyways, then along came Zeus. Wow, $6, but the market price is sitting at $2.81. I think this is decent value. In the Sapphire Steel decks, this card is being played at like 2 to 3. An Amber Steel Song, I think it's played at 3, so it's definitely good value. Steel definitely needed a card like this to help overcome other Steel matchups, and the fact that it hits locations is very important as well. Obviously, very good card, right? It deals with a lot in the meta. It deals with like Maleficent Dragons after it drops. Even the Maleficent Dragon goes 2 for 1, but at least you can instantly out it so it doesn't quest for 2. It deals with opposing Beast Tragic Heroes. It finishes off a lot of things if you can ping damage on them. Like, it's a really good card. And personally for me, again, $3 for a really good meta card. Like, if I don't have 4, I'm picking them up. I already have 4. I paid for 2 of them. I paid $1.70, and then I pulled 2. So yeah, I mean, I would still buy them though if I didn't have them already. Just if you're playing Steel, like, you need a couple of copies of this. The only problem is if you're playing Steel, like, to competitively, you need your Beast Tragic Heroes, your Tinkerbells. It gets very, very expensive, right? So yeah, kind of sucks. But again, if you're already invested, you can see that this card is kind of stabilizing at the lower point that it's ever been. There's no real reason for this to go that much lower unless the market is really saturated with them. But people are buying them for close to $3, so it looks like, or this one's closer to 2. So yeah, if you can snag a deal on these, especially around $2, I would just pick them up. The last couple of cards we want to take a look at, Madame Medusa, slightly trending up. I remember I picked up copies of this for $1.30 Canadian, so they're definitely, at $1.50, $2 USD, have gone up a little bit. But it's hard to see this card getting power crept. I know, well, who would have thought Tremaine would have got power crept so soon? But like a 6 cost on Inkable that's a 4/4 body is pretty good, and there's a lot of relevant threats that are 3 or less strength. Like, to be power crept, this thing would have to be like something that costs less or is inkable for a similar effect, or the same cost to banish like 4 strength with like another limitation, maybe weaker strength and the toughness. I don't know, but I think this card is a pretty safe investment. I bought extra copies at $1.50. You can't go wrong. People will need this card for anything Ruby that they play, basically. Like Ruby Sapphire plays it, Ruby Amethyst plays it. It is a very strong card given the meta and what's being played right now, like Robin Hoods and like Ariels, Beast Tragic Heroes. Unfortunately can't hit Cogsworth, but it hits a lot in the meta. The Ursula, but again, being 6, it is kind of pricey, but seeing this card can like win you a game. It's won me a couple games, I can tell you that for sure. Morph, again, a $2 rare that all-time low it looks like, but I paid $5 for 2 copies. I pulled 2. No, I pulled 3, but I bought 2 still, so I had an extra one, and then I've been picking up foil ones if I can find them at a good value. But yeah, I think Morph, $1.50, $2. You already know how I feel. I've already talked about it. Card only gets better over time, right, guys? And Emerald Steel is the only real deck that plays this right now, but Floodborns will always come out in every set, I imagine, right? And so Morph, if you're playing Emerald, might become a staple in the future, kind of like what Robin Hood is right now, or we thought, or it was in the beginning, right? It's seen limited use in certain applications, but yeah, I just think Morph, good card. Bare Necessities, I talked about this in my last market watch. Anything under, or sorry, this card being at around $1 is a good value if you don't have them, in my opinion. Very strong card. Unlike the Ursula Deceiver that can only hit songs, and then you wasted, not wasted, but you paid 2 ink to basically look at the opponent's hand if you don't hit anything. So you have a 1/3 vanilla on board. Bare Necessities will likely always hit something, right? An action, which can be a song or not, a location, an item, right? It's very powerful. If the only real application with this card right now is Amber Steel Song, but any Amber deck, in my opinion, should probably be looking at playing this card because it is that strong. Yeah, very good card, and at an all-time low. I've already picked up my 4 copies, but if I hadn't, it's not a bad price in my opinion. Chernabog, under $1, literally going for like half of $1, 50 cents, etc. A good card in my opinion. I would definitely make sure I have a couple. I do have a couple. Because this card can see a lot of application, a lot of use in like the Amber Ruby Mufasa. It could even be played in Steel Song and like as a one of. It can be played in aggro deck like Amethyst aggro, Amber aggro, because as all of your like slow drops get banished, you eventually just put them all back into your deck, play a Chernabog. And as we've seen how popular Steel is in the meta, Steel will have a very hard time outing this. This thing could take out basically any threat as well, being a 9/9 body, and a quest for 3, right? So, and not that it's really too much of a significant thing, but it does prevent the deck out. If you watch the finals of Sapphire Steel versus Amber Steel, where Sapphire Steel ended up winning in the online Pixelborn tournament, I think it was the final game, they almost decked out. They had like 7 cards left each. So neither player could hold New World. But like Chernabog, just put all my characters back in. It's like now I don't even care. Now if I draw or if I have my whole New World, I'm gonna deck you out and win the game. All right. Not that that really is gonna come up too often, but these intense games do get down to the wire, and Chernabog does help you, does prevent you from decking out as well. The final card we're going to take a look at before we wrap up is Prince Eric, Expert Helmsman. Under $1 now. Not a bad price. I picked mine up for $1.80 Canadian. So they have dropped off, but again, at $1.80, it's like, do I really care about losing like 80 cents to $1? No. I'd rather have the card than not. It's not really being played in anything except for Amber Ruby Mufasa, which only plays around 2 copies at most. It is still a relevant card. It does quest for 2. The strength and toughness thing, at a 2/2 is very weak. And in Ruby Amethyst, at a 4 cost, you'd rather just play a rabbit or a goat, I think. Ideally a rabbit. And so this card has seen limited application because the fact that you have to see this with a Teeth and Ambitions for it to get the effect off immediately is a little unfortunate. But again, it's a card that forces awkward plays from your opponent potentially, but I just don't think it represents a lot of value right now. But again, not bad to have a playset on hand if it's under 50 cents or under $1 in my opinion. Anyways guys, that's going to go ahead and wrap it up for this market watch. Let me know if you found this video useful, if you made it to the end. If you haven't dropped a like on this video, it would be appreciated as well. Again, thank you for watching, and Quantum is out.